Now, my first guest today is Saratu Ishaya Audu, known as Sarah Audu, a London-based British Nigerian lawyer with many years of experience in private law, divorce, and financial remedy matters, who's been in family law for the past 25 years. But in January, she turned her full attention to her artwork, and astonishingly, it took off prolifically, catching the British art world by surprise and setting off a firestorm of enthusiasm among lovers of African and European hybrid art. Influenced by impressionists like Matisse and Monet, and you can also see the Picasso influence in her work, as well as, of course, Africa, her art has become a sort of pictorial story of the journey of life, from trauma to victory. Well, in a moment, we'll cross to London and speak virtually to Sarah Audu about her art and its elements. But first, here's a video sequence of some of her artwork on display in London. And that's some of the works of the lawyer turned artist Saratu Ishaya Audu, known as Sarah Audu. And I'm suitably delighted to say that Sarah Audu joins me now from London via online WebEx. Really great to see you on Arise, Sarah, and very proud of the work that you're doing. I mean, I have to say that your exhibits look very good indeed, and that's an understatement. I mean, some of them had me absolutely entranced as I watched them. And I think the thing that really gets me is that you can feel life flowing out of them. I mean, not to sound sort of weird or anything, but it wouldn't surprise me if the characters suddenly jumped out of the painting and ran out of the room. I mean, that's how searing they are. I mean, was that intended by you?
No, but it might be maybe a representation of my own personality, which is quite strong and quite determined. So maybe that determination and hope comes across in my paintings. But I'd like to say thank you very much for having me. It's really exciting. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's an absolutely enormous pleasure. And we also thank you because, I mean, you've become something of a celebrity in the art world. So, I mean, you know, you're not the sort of person you kind of just pick up the phone and she comes running down. Never mind the fact that you've had an illustrious career. as a lawyer for 25 years. But I mean, how do you decide what to paint? What's the process? Is it like, when you begin to work, I suppose on the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, or do you have a sort of clear idea of the picture before you pick up your paintbrush?
Initially, I just went to an art night just to have fun, really. It was in a pub. And they said after 2 hours, you'd have a painting. And I thought, well, great, I really want to paint. So when I got to the art night, I found I was a bit different from everybody else. Everybody else was being very, very careful. But I just wanted to have fun. So I just said to the teacher, can you just tell me what to do next? I don't, I'm not Picasso. I'm not J.W. Turner. And basically, I really enjoyed it. And then I went to a second and a third art night. And after that, I just went to an art shop, got myself some canvas and acrylic. And initially, I looked at the old masters. So I started off with things like The Scream and Starry Night. But after that, my imagination took over. So the paintings you're seeing, they're from my head. A lot of times I believe that plants, stones, things like that, they're conscious. So a lot of my plants and my stones and my rocks have people embedded in them. And I managed to sort of package stories in, by sort of using. So, for example, yesterday I did a painting of Donald Trump in America, and I used red poppies to show apparently 68% of African Americans at the moment are suffering some form of anxiety, panic symptoms in America. So I put Black people in red poppies. So that was using flowers, but I'm sort of portraying a message. And for Donald Trump, I've kind of made him as a clown with small hands. So at the moment, it may look like just trivia, but in 10 years' time, you would be able to look at my paintings and you'd be able to tell what was happening today. So I think a lot of the things that I do, my ideas come from what's happening around me. What I notice is, for example, during lockdown, I think the earth itself is shifting gear. I think that we're going into a phase of love. I think the world is looking for equity. So a lot of my paintings also show people leaving the matrix of the earth where we all fight one another and looking for, something, a higher dimension of peace. So I think that I try to communicate that message.
Well, that's very interesting, because that rather answers a question I was going to ask you, which is, I find the Donald Trump with the little hands, I haven't seen that one, but I expect that'll be quite interesting. But of course, African art is often inspired by the natural environment, and I'm wondering if that is what inspires you to sort of create characters within that natural world. We see lots of repeated patterns, for example, symbols, bright colors, that sort of thing. Also, objects such as flowers and trees are used as symbols, and these symbols, these symbolic patterns represent the history, oftentimes the history and beliefs of a culture. Help us explore those kinds of patterns and symbols in your paintings, and whether that is a nod to the African side of you.
So I think it is, actually. I think without realizing it, I was communicating the way that my ancestors communicate. So, for example, if you look at all my images, I probably have 1 out of 300 pictures where a human being has teeth. So a lot of my characters don't actually have teeth. And when you look at African art from a long time ago, Picasso actually was influenced by African art. You'll see that we Africans were using abstract art before people like Picasso. We were, in a very long time ago in Africa, before the modern age, before people like Picasso, we were using art in a metaphysical way. So African villages didn't really draw a chief. They drew the spirit behind the chief. So if you look at Picasso's paintings, it's very metaphysical. He's looking a lot at you look at a surface picture of something. Picasso is looking at all the different elements that would make up that surface picture. Now, that thinking of Picasso actually came from African ancestors, and I think I'm going back to those African ancestors. And I've been told that my people look like Neanderthals. And if you look at African statues, the old African statues, the lot of features were a bit like Neanderthals. So I think what I'm doing is fusing what my ancestors did together with the education of today, things like quantum physics. If you look at, I see patterns in everything, and that comes from maths and fractals and Mandelbrot and his theory that, and his equation as well, that you can get order out of chaos. So a lot of my painting, Codependence, I've got it here. So that painting, I actually had a very scattered, confused background with all kinds of different paints splattered on it. And I decided to see if I could make meaning out of that. So a lot of my paintings start off like that. I don't know what I'm going to paint. I just have a lot of mess. And then I try to create order from that mess. So the pole dancer you just showed, at the side of the pole dancer, there's two people that could be described as perverts, and they're sort of sort of sideways glance. Now that was two pictures that I put together. So I do that a lot. I put pictures together, and one of the things that I use at the moment, I'm using is Grey's Anatomy, because I want to do an anatomical series where I look at, for example, a red blood cell, and maybe a red blood cell coming out of the aorta. So what is it feeling? And I try to capture the mood.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, well, that's a cross-section of people who've been captivated, like I have, by the paintings of Sarah Audu, and the lawyer turned artist. Sarah Audu is still with me via WebEx from London. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. I mean, is there a lot of symbolism, Sarah, in your art that need or stand in need of translation? I mean, do you, in a sense, think you are remaking the world through your art?
I think there is definitely a lot of symbolism. So, for example, I've just painted, I sent it to your studio, a painting called The Complex Woman with the Fleeing Men. She's an alpha female. So I think what I'm saying in that picture is that COVID has shown us that the women are actually dealing with the problems, complex problems, a lot better than the men. And we're seeing a lot of fleeing men. We're seeing, precedents that absolutely, when there's, problems in the world, or precedents that are pretending, male precedents, that these problems are not happening. So I do infuse those messages. I do think it's time for women to be taken a bit more seriously. And I think it's time for soft skills to come into the world. I think for a very long time, we've been into things like physics, chemistry, biology. I think we need to worry about kindness, love, color. Color comes in, joy, hope. And I think that's what I'm trying to do.
And of course, Sarah, your roots lie in southern Kaduna, which is in northern Nigeria. That's where your family come from. And it's become a hotbed, of clashes and confrontations between Christians and Muslims, an assortment of ethnic groups. I mean, have they managed to restore a measure of harmony there? Because it seems as if the clashes have now turned into crime, with lots of banditry and kidnappings, etc. there. Do you keep a wary eye on developments out of there?
Yes, in fact, today I heard that a family friend had lost a younger brother who was only 52, and he was actually kidnapped in his own home in Kaduna, so not in the outskirts, and his wife and kids were tortured. He was killed, and his wife and kids had to pay 11 million for their release. So this is in Kaduna today. And I think that what's very unfortunate that I see in Nigeria is the tensions we have between ethnicities and religions, where I think the problem, the common enemy, is actually not our religion. The common enemy, we need to look at what our common enemy is, which I think is, if you look at, for example, the West. So when we Africans have a finished product that we want to export to England, the tariffs on that are extremely high. But the tariffs on raw materials are next to nothing. So I think that Africa is actually being raped by the West. Africa is the aid. We do not need aid. But while the people of Africa are fighting between themselves, you know, there's unfortunately they allow the West to do these things. We really should stop fighting each other. It's not about Fulani. I'm a Nigerian whose father is House of Fulani. My mother came from Bendel. There's a lot of us in Nigeria that our parents intermarried. It's stupid to fight against because of religion. Half my family are Muslim, the other half are Christian. You know, we really need to address, for example, issues like why our senators are paid more than President Obama or Trump, and you know why we've become the poorest nation in the world, while we also have the largest churches in the world. We really need to look at those deep issues, in my opinion.
And well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, some will argue or dispute what you're saying, but I suspect that most people will find nuggets of truth in what you've just said there. I mean, does any of that find its way into your art?
Yes, in my art, I do a lot of codependent relationships. So I reckon there's a codependent relationship between Nigeria and her leaders, and also between the Nigerian leaders or African leaders in general and China. So I do a lot of those paintings. I have a painting, for example, of an African woman who's praying, and she's got a belt, and the belt has the United States and China. So I do think that our eyes are, you know, we seem a bit blind to what's happening around us, which is that China seems to be owning us at the moment.
And I mean, I know we've talked about a lot of very serious things, but is there also a sense of humor in your art? I mean, I sort of think of when you talked about Donald Trump there, but it may not have been, you know, humorous, but perhaps, you know, cynical or sardonic, but still humorous, or perhaps a better word might be satirical.
Well, yes. So, for example, I've got a painting of the three, you know, because Christmas is coming. So we have we three kings, but mine are, you know, three queens. They're females and they're black. I have a picture of ghosts bathing. So that stretches your imagination because we're taught that ghosts have no bodies. So I do have pictures with, for example, I have a horse rider with a very contorted face. And what I was trying to say is that, look, you've got a horse, stop complaining about life. Many people don't have a horse, you know. So I do have, just behind me, you can see a picture of Adam and Eve. So there's Eve, sorry, being entertained by a snake, and Adam is lying on the tree. So that's the story of Adam and Eve, as far as I'm concerned.
And Sarah, would you say that you've been very eclectic in picking up lots of sort of styles from different parts of the world, or is your art informed strictly by Africa and Europe? In other words, you know, why is your art the way it is, and does it in some ways confound the traditional view of a fine artist, perhaps even subvert it in a way?
Yes, so basically, I would call myself an Anglo-Nigerian, and I think that there are a lot of us now that are Anglo-Nigerians. We're both English and we're both Nigerian. So my art contains aspects of both. It contains aspects of my African heritage, but also my Western education. So that's the infusion of things like philosophy, law, physics, the Bible, the question of the apple, Adam and Eve. I have one where you talk about humor. So I have one where Adam is eating the apple, but the apple is placed in Eve's pubic area.